There is a statistical anomaly in the modern human mind that most experts are afraid to touch. We live in the safest era in the history of our species. You are not at risk of being eaten by a predator when you leave your house. Extreme famine is a statistical rarity in the West, and medicine has doubled our life expectancy. Yet, rates of anxiety, depression, and a chronic sense of fragility have never been higher. We traded physical danger for psychological terror. And the reason for this isn't what you think. It's not that the world got harder. It's that you have been systematically weakened by the very safety designed to protect you. To understand what has been stolen from your mental architecture, we need to look at a very specific control group. There is something fundamentally different about people who grew up in the 1970s. I'm not talking about cheap nostalgia or romanticizing the past. I'm talking about pure neuroscience. That decade didn't just shape a generation, it forged a specific type of psychological resilience that we are only now beginning to map and, tragically, failing to replicate. The greatest mistake of developmental psychology in the last 3 decades was a simple yet fatal assumption that more supervision equals better outcomes. We believe that if we provide more structure, more guidance, and more protection, we will create stronger adults. The 1970s kids proved that theory dead wrong. They operated under a regime that today would be considered negligence, but was actually elite training for the prefrontal cortex. Think about the raw reality of that time. You were 7 years old. Your mom pushed you out the door after breakfast with a single instruction that sounds insane to a modern parent. Be home before dark. There was no GPS tracking, no hourly check-ins via text, no schedule of extracurricular activities meticulously planned to optimize your childhood resume. There was just you, your neighborhood friends, and the terrifying freedom to make your own choices. You spent entire afternoons building forts in empty lots, creating elaborate games using nothing but sticks and imagination, and settling tribal disputes with other kids without a single adult stepping in. When someone got hurt, you assessed the damage. Blood? Wipe it on your shirt. Broken bone? Run for help. When boredom struck, you didn't have a screen to anesthetize your brain. You invented something. When conflicts erupted, you negotiated peace or declared war, but you worked it out amongst yourselves because there was no one to arbitrate justice for you. This hands-off approach wasn't abandonment. It was the ultimate vote of trust. And what neuroscientists have discovered is extraordinary. This kind of unstructured play, this exposure to calculated risk and boredom, literally rewires the brain for creativity and problem solving. It builds what we call executive function, the ability to plan, adapt, and think critically without an external instruction manual. Today, if you feel you freeze before simple decisions, if you feel you need constant validation to know you're on the right path, or if uncertainty causes you physical panic, it is because this mental musculature has atrophied from excess comfort. Before we continue dissecting how to recover this strength, I want you to make a silent commitment to yourself right now. If you seek not just entertainment, but the reconstruction of your own mental fortitude, subscribe to the channel now. We are not here to pat you on the back. We are here to wake up the giant that was sedated by modernity. Back to the scenario. Imagine you are riding your bike through the neighborhood in 1975. You notice a neighbor's car in the driveway at a weird time. You learn to read the room instantly. You knew which yard you could cut through and which neighbor would yell. You knew when the older kids were in a bad mood, and you should make yourself scarce. This wasn't paranoia. It was survival intelligence. When you navigate the world without constant adult narration, watch the step. Don't talk to strangers. Say sorry to your friend. You develop a sixth sense for situations. You learn to assess risks on your own, to make split-second decisions about safety, and to read people's intentions from body language and tone. What researchers call hypervigilant social awareness sounds clinical, but in practice, it was just you paying attention. This made that generation sharp in a way that modern people, whose parents narrated every social interaction like a reality show documentary, simply aren't. The tragedy is that we replaced this competence with anxiety. We traded autonomy for supervised safety. And the cost isn't just a boring childhood, it is a crippling adulthood. We are creating and becoming adults who wait for permission to live. But the rabbit hole goes much deeper. What happened when those kids came home to an empty house wasn't loneliness. It was the birth of something you probably miss every day but can't name. Fast forward the clock to 3:30 p.m. on a random Tuesday in that decade. The school bus drops you off at the corner and you walk to your house, fishing the key out from under a flower pot or tied to a string inside the mailbox. You unlock the door and step inside. There is no panic, no fear, just the sound of your footsteps on the floorboards and the constant hum of the refrigerator. You drop your backpack, feed yourself, turn on the TV, or start your homework. Maybe you use the landline to call a friend, if the line is free. This daily routine, which today would trigger social services in many countries, wasn't loneliness. It was competence. Every afternoon, that child proved to themselves that they could handle the next few hours alone, that they were capable, that they didn't need an authority figure hovering over their shoulder to ensure their basic survival. Something fundamental was hardwired into the nervous system of these kids during those quiet afternoons. When things went wrong, they didn't look around for someone to blame or to fix the mess. They asked themselves what they could do to solve it. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control. It is the unshakable belief that your actions directly influence your outcomes. For the modern child, this is an abstract concept we try to teach in motivational seminars. For the 1970s child, it wasn't a concept, it was the physics of reality. You fell, you get up. You broke something, you figure out how to fix it or explain it before your parents get home. This self-reliance runs bone deep. It creates adults who do not wait for rescue. But let's deepen the wound, because competence is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about those moments when you had finished your homework, watched your allocated hour of cartoons, and still had 3 hours before dinner. You wandered into the room where your mom was busy and said those two dangerous words, "I'm bored." You know exactly what she replied. She didn't hand you an iPad. She didn't suggest a list of playful activities. She said, without even looking up, "Go find something to do." That was it. End of discussion. No immediate solution. Just you and that restless, itchy feeling of a time vacuum. So you went outside and stared at clouds. You reorganized your card collection for the 3rd time. You called a friend and they were bored too. So you were bored together until one of you invented something stupid or brilliant to do. You learned, through pain, that boredom wasn't a medical emergency. It was just a signal, a little nudge from your brain saying it was ready to create something new. The root of modern fragility lies exactly here. Parents today treat boredom like a disease that needs immediate treatment with digital dopamine. But that generation sat with boredom. They let it simmer on low heat until creativity emerged. This tolerance for discomfort extends far beyond childhood. These are people who can sit in silence without reaching for their phone every 30 seconds. Who can wait in long lines without losing their minds. Who handle uncertainty because they learned early on that not every moment needs to be filled with stimulation or ready-made answers. What happens in the brain during these periods of understimulation is critical. Studies show that the resting brain enters what we call the default mode network. It is in this state that memory consolidation, future projection, and deep self-reflection occur. Basically, boredom taught their brains to generate ideas from nothing. Today, we outsource our imagination to algorithms. When you kill boredom instantly with a phone, you are actually killing your capacity for innovation and self-knowledge. You have become an addict to external stimuli, unable to hear your own inner voice because the noise of the world never stops. And this brings us directly to the big oak tree at the end of the street. The one with branches thick enough to climb until the ground looked like a miniature down below. That place where you learned lessons no book could teach, and where real danger began to shape your perception of who you are. Because creativity born of boredom needed a stage to act on, and that stage was often dangerous. If you think lack of supervision was risky, wait until you understand what the lack of risk has done to your ability to judge reality. The cost of overprotection is about to become clear, and it is much higher than a broken arm. Let's go back to that oak tree at the end of the street. You climbed branches that cracked under your weight, high enough that the ground looked small. You rode your bike feeling the wind whip your face as you flew down steep hills, often taking your hands off the handlebars just to prove you could. You jumped off bridges into murky water and built ramps for your skateboard with plywood that was definitely not structurally sound. And yes, the naked truth is that sometimes you got hurt. You scraped your knees to the raw meat, twisted ankles, maybe even broke a bone. But here is the secret that modern overprotection tried to erase. Pain was an irreplaceable teacher. You learned through direct experience what was actually dangerous versus what just looked scary. You developed an internal calibration system for risk. On that tall tree, you learned exactly how high you could climb before the branches got too thin. On that bike jump, you learned the physical difference between a thrilling landing and a trip to the emergency room. This wasn't recklessness, though it looked like it to outsiders. It was wisdom being etched into the body. While other generations freeze in the face of uncertain situations, the 1970s kid learned to assess and adapt. They understand that some risks are worth taking because they lived the consequences of both caution and stupid boldness. This created what psychologists call a calibrated sense of risk. The alarming problem today is that by removing all physical dangers from childhood, we have created adults who cannot distinguish a real risk from emotional discomfort. When you never fall from a tree, the whole world looks like a mortal threat. Without this calibration, your internal alarm system goes off for everything. A rude email from the boss, a contrary opinion on the internet, an unexpected change of plans. You live in a state of maximum alert because you never learned where your real limits are, because you were never allowed to test them. Think about the cost of this. The inability to assess risk cripples your professional and personal life. You don't ask for that raise. You don't start that business. You don't approach that interesting person at the bar, all because your brain, deprived of real data about danger and survival, classifies social rejection in the same category as falling off a cliff. Excessive safety didn't create safer people. It created people terrified of their own shadow. Risk avoidance has become the biggest risk of all because it guarantees a life of stagnant mediocrity. Biology is clear. Living systems need stressors to strengthen. Your bones need impact to maintain density. Your immune system needs pathogens to create antibodies, and your psyche needs manageable chaos to create order. By sanitizing the human experience, we didn't just protect children, we weakened them. We removed the vaccine of adversity. And this leads us to even more complex territory. You needed that physical resilience to navigate the brutal social world of unsupervised childhood. Picture the playground on a summer afternoon. No adult was there to referee your friendships or mediate your conflicts. It was the law of the jungle, but with unwritten rules you had to decipher fast. If you think falling off a bike hurts, wait until we remember what it was like to have your heart broken or your ego publicly destroyed without anyone there to console you immediately. What happened in those moments defined your emotional intelligence in a way no HR course ever will. And that is exactly where the internal battle begins to get ugly. The social jungle of your childhood had no park rangers. When a friend said they would meet you at the park and didn't show up, you had to decide alone if they forgot, if they were sick, or if you were now mortal enemies. When two people fought and you were caught in the middle, there was no teacher with a whistle to mediate the conflict. You had to navigate this emotional minefield using only your developing intuition. This forced you to become a voracious student of human behavior long before you knew what psychology was. You learned to read micro-expressions, that little tightness around someone's eyes that meant they were upset, even if they said they were fine. You could sense the tension in a room before anyone even spoke. You knew who the leader was, who the peacemaker was, and who would cave to pressure. People wrongly assume that less supervised childhoods created antisocial or distant adults. The reality is the opposite. These kids had to develop incredibly sophisticated social skills because they were operating without a safety net. They learned to read tone, interpret subtext, and understand that most communication happens below the surface of words. Today, we see adults who cannot interpret silence in a meeting or need emojis to understand if a sentence is sarcastic or serious. Emotional literacy was traded for digital literality. But this emotional intelligence was earned in the moments you least expected, and usually in the moments you were alone with your pain. Something happened at school. Maybe someone said something cruel. Maybe you failed a test or fought with your best friend. You came home, lay on your bed staring at the ceiling, and felt that hot tightness in your chest. Anger, shame, disappointment. But here is the crucial difference. You couldn't immediately text someone to vent. You couldn't post a vague status on social media to seek external validation. You couldn't even call anyone because your mom was on the landline. So, you did the only thing possible. You sat with it. You stared at the ceiling, maybe punched your pillow a few times, and felt the emotion until it eventually passed. This wasn't emotional repression, it was regulation. You learned, organically, that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. You learned that you could feel disappointment without catastrophizing, that you could experience conflict without needing to resolve it immediately or get third-party approval. What psychologists call emotional self-regulation, one of the strongest predictors of success in both personal and professional relationships, was forged in those moments of solitude. Those who grew up in the 1970s don't need constant reassurance because they developed internal mechanisms to manage their emotional states. They know that discomfort doesn't kill. And this tolerance extended to desire. Let's talk about the exquisite torture of waiting. Think about what it was like to wait for your favorite TV show. All week you planned your life to be in front of the screen at that specific time. And when the episode ended on a cliffhanger, you had to wait 7 whole days, 168 hours, to see what happened next. There was no streaming, no skip intro, no binge watching. This rhythm of anticipation and reward wasn't a lesson your parents taught you with flashcards. It was just reality, and it created something powerful, the ability to delay gratification, the understanding deep in your bones that anticipation makes the reward sweeter. Christmas felt magical specifically because you waited 365 days for it. The first day of summer vacation was euphoric because you earned it through 9 months of school. Modern brains are addicted to instant gratification, immediate answers, next-day delivery, dopamine on demand. But the 1970s brain was programmed in a world that moved slower. Research consistently shows that people who can postpone immediate pleasure for future rewards have lower addiction rates, higher academic achievement, and more stable relationships. You weren't learning patience, you were living in it. But now you are an adult. The world has changed, the speed has increased, and you find yourself trapped between this ancient programming of resilience and the hysterical demands of the modern world. You feel this strength slipping through your fingers, diluted by convenience. The question remains not how to go back in time, but how to use this old code to hack the current system. How to take this analog wisdom and apply it in a digital world without losing your sanity. The answer requires a conscious and painful choice that few are willing to make. Today, decades later, many of these survivors of the 70s are standing in their own kitchens, watching their children or younger subordinates struggle with trivial difficulties. Maybe it's a math problem, a disagreement at the office, or a criticism on social media, and they feel that biological instinct to jump in, to fix, to smooth the edge. But they stop, not because they don't care, but because they understand, at a cellular level, that overprotection is the fastest path to chronic anxiety. They know that to create genuine confidence, whether in a child or in yourself, you need to experience manageable risks. They resist the urge to be the hero of someone else's story. When someone fails, they don't run in with an emotional band-aid. They ask the golden question, the same one life asked them silently years ago. What do you think you can do differently next time? They prioritize competence over comfort. This is the master key we have lost. Modern society sells comfort as the ultimate goal of human existence. But the generation of the 70s knows that comfort is just a byproduct. The real goal is capability. The belief that temporary discomfort leads to long-term strength, that struggle builds character, and that independence creates the only true security that exists. These are not just philosophical beliefs from self-help books. They are neural pathways carved by lived experience. These individuals carry something that is becoming a relic in our hyper-connected and overstimulated world, a quiet confidence. The absolute certainty that they can handle whatever life throws at them, not because someone guaranteed it would be easy, but because they have already survived the difficult alone. So, what is the action plan for you, here and now? How to recover this feral neurobiology in a digital world? First, stop treating boredom as an emergency. The next time you have 5 minutes of waiting, don't grab your phone. Let your brain reboot. Feel the itch of the lack of stimulus and don't scratch it. That is where your sanity resides. Second, reintroduce calibrated risk into your life. Do something that has a real possibility of public failure or physical discomfort. Leave the air-conditioned gym and go run in the rain. Present that bold idea in the meeting without apologizing in advance. Your brain needs to remember that failure is not fatal. Third, and most importantly, practice strategic neglect with yourself and others. Stop self-sabotaging by seeking immediate relief for every negative emotion. Are you sad? Be sad. Are you angry? Feel the anger. Don't anesthetize it. The ability to sit with the emotion is the superpower that distinguishes adults from big children. Their brains were literally rewired by freedom, strengthened by boredom, and calibrated by risk. They are living proof that we have overcomplicated the business of being human. Sometimes, the best gift you can give yourself is not protection from the storm, but the certainty that you know how to pilot the boat when it arrives. We live in soft times that create fragile men and women. But the biology that forged that generation is still inside you, dormant under layers of modern convenience and induced fear. It is time to wake it up. It is time to let go of the handrail. If you have made it this far, if you understand that true security comes from within and not from without, I want to know who the strong ones are who stayed until the very last second. Write in the comments just 3 words: competence over comfort. This will be our password. This will prove that you are not here just for entertainment, but that you are ready to take responsibility for your own resilience. The world won't get easier, but you can get stronger. The choice, as it always was back then, is exclusively yours. See you in the next video.